Good morning everybody, or good evening wherever you are in the world, whatever your time zone is, and welcome to Patchwork Quilts with Diane. My name's Diane and this week's question is, do you sal? Have you ever saled? Are you thinking of salling, or are you a regular saller? If you don't know what I'm talking about, this is a prime example. A sal is a sew along, and it's something that I have never participated in before. And a few weeks ago, just over a month ago, Sheri McGill on Lessons Learned announced that she was going to design a sew along, and she invited viewers to join her. Well, like I say, I've never completed a sew along before, and I'd just been gifted some fabric to make some quilts for project liners, and I thought I'll use some of that fabric and I will join in with the sew along. So a sew along usually starts with an introduction, and in that first part of the sew along you're told roughly the size of the quilt. Well, Sheri said her quilt would be 70 inches square. I didn't want to make one as big as that because I wanted to make a quilt for a younger child, so I thought I'll just scale it down as we go along. And then also in that introductory session you're told basically what the quilt would be. So we were told it would be a row quilt, so you're given a block and you have to repeat that identically to fill up the space of your row, and we were told that it would be a 5-row block design, and so it would last for 5 weeks. And Sheri also gave us some suggestions about the quantity of fabric that you would use, and Sheri also gave us some suggestions about the sort of fabric to use. So she recommended a background fabric, a feature fabric and a contrast to the feature, so 3 different sorts of fabrics. And then the design that Sheri was going to follow to take these blocks from was from a set of 4 books. They were designed by the Kimberly Jolly team, who make the Jolly bars. So if you're not familiar with pre-cuts, a 10-inch layer cake is a 10-inch square, and a Jolly bar is half the width of a 10-inch layer cake. So it will be 5 inches wide, 10 inches long, and it's called a Jolly bar because I'm not absolutely certain, but I think that was an idea from Kimberly Jolly and her team, so hence the name Jolly bars. Don't get it confused with jelly rolls. And of course, because Kimberly Jolly and her team have all the copyrights to those books and the designs within them and the dimensions of each of the blocks, Sheri couldn't share those with you on YouTube, but she did advise you to try and get your hands on these 4 books in the series so that you could copy them. But so I wasn't worried about the dimensions of the blocks that Sheri was going to use because I'm scaling mine down anyway, and so I don't need those 4 books. And if you've watched my show for any length of time, you know I have a favourite way of working, which is 3-inch squares. And so I used my graph paper, I created my designs, and I'll put those on my community page. So you go to my YouTube channel, look for the community page. If you click onto there, you'll see all of the sizes that I used for mine. I mean, you could grow these into a full-size quilt if you wanted to. You could just extend the rows by some more blocks. It wouldn't be difficult to make it to a full size if you wanted to. So let's start with having a close look at my fabric selection. And for this quilt, I'm going to use this fabric. I'm not sure how much it will take because it's a mystery, but I have here 2 fat quarter bundles. There's 5 pieces in each, and it's called Pastel Paws. So I will show you the fabric. So those are the 5 colours, and I bought to go with those this lovely buttery gold with white stars. I thought that would be lovely for a young child. And then the background is quite bold. So this is pinks, and that is from Studio E. There's 2 yards in that, and so I'm thinking background, contrast, and then these are the feature colours. So although you are given a rough idea of the sort of fabrics that you'll need to complete a sew along, you're not told in what sort of order that they will fall. So in row 1 we were given a heart design, and as you can see on my quilt it's not row 1. I didn't lay it out exactly as Sheri recommended because I made my fabric selections for each individual row, and then when I started to put them together the colours didn't work or the sizes didn't quite work because, like I say, I was scaling it down. And so my row 1 are these hearts. So once I'd snowballed the top parts of each half, I sewed them together and then I snowballed the bottom in exactly the same way. And then I had my first row of 5 hearts and I thought they looked very nice. And so on the second week we were shown how to make these lovely star designs. So it's quite a big size star, so that was row 2. If you watch Sheri's YouTube channel, you'll see that she constructed 3 big stars, and in the centre there was a dark background and she used a square for her centre. I'm using a 5.5-inch square for mine, and the points of her star were in the gunmetal grey, and then she had all of the brightly coloured fabric that she's using to surround that star, and then in the corners were little squares of the brightly coloured fabric. So it's a scrappy sort of surround to a dark star. Well, on my child's quilt, it's going to be a yellow and white star and surrounded by all of these pastel colours. And so the first thing I'm going to do is to put my fabric squares, which are 4 3/4 inches, and I'll sew 1/4 inch around the outside, press, snip off the corners, cut on the diagonal, and then I'll have my points. And of course, because I'm scaling down, the sizes of my parts were different to Sheri's. So week 1 and 2 completed on time as well. I sometimes hear that people who are participating in sew-alongs, they fall behind the weeks and then they have to catch up. So like I say, mine's a smaller quilt and it's quite easy to do the parts that I wanted to do for each week. And week 3 came along quite quickly, and it was these cotton reels. Now there are 5 pieces of different fabric in my fat quarter bundle, so I wanted to make 5 of these cotton reels, and I wanted as much fabric of the design to show in the centre, so I made my central square as big as I possibly could. And there were different ways of putting these cotton reel blocks together, so I'll share with you how I put mine together. So the first thing I've done is cut out a 4.5-inch square. There's some lovely little kittens on that one, and then I'm going to put a 4.5-inch strip to the top and the bottom like that. So this block now is 4.5 by 6.5 inches, and these strips on the side, the background fabric, they are 1.5 inches wide, 6.5 inches deep. And what I want to do is to snowball these corners to form the top of the cotton reel. So I've drawn a line on the back, and I have to check and double check to make sure this is correct. So I place that on. That's the piece I want to keep on the left. So that's the piece I'm going to cut off, like so. And then the bottom, again, check and double check. So that's the piece I want to keep. That's the piece I want to cut off. And on the piece that I want to cut off, I'm going to try and sew just on the side that's coming off, side of the line. So just on the very edge. So I do that for both sides. Okay, I'll sew these. And then before I press and cut these off, I'm just going to check. So that will fit like that, that will fit like that on there, and that will fit on there. Okay, happy now to press and cut, and then I'm just going to sew these onto the sides. And I've trimmed that block now to 6.5 inches square, and then I'll add the sashing. So checking and double checking when you make snowballs. It's the worst thing, isn't it, when you've marked a line and you cut the wrong piece off. I'm not a huge lover of making snowball blocks. I like the designs that you can get from them, but you've always got that little bit of waste, haven't you? So if it's a big enough chunk that you're chopping off, then I tend to put those into half square triangles again. So I've saved the parts from the bottom of the hearts. I've made some little pinwheels with those, but the top parts of the hearts and the pieces from these cotton reels were just too small, so I couldn't save those. But put those cotton reels together and I thought they looked lovely too. Row 3 complete. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to next week with Sheri. She said it will be bigger blocks. I think she said there was 3 again. So sometimes you are given a little teaser of what's going to follow. And she did say it was quite a big block. And this week it is the shoe fly pie block. So it's the top one here. I'll show you how I completed my shoe fly pie. So I began by making little 4 patches for each of the corners, and those 4 patches, when they were pressed and trimmed, measured 3 inches square. Like I say, all these dimensions will be on my community page. And then I wanted to make the half square triangles. So they are in 4 3/4 inch squares again. It's the feature fabric and the background fabric that form the points on the shoe flies. So I did those next, same way as I always do. 4 3/4 inch square, 1/4 inch seam, cut on the diagonal, all of that stuff. And to build the block, I took a 3 inch square and then I laid next to that a 1 3/4 inch strip by 3 inches on each side. And then there was a 1 3/4 inch square in each corner. And that central block that measured 5.5 inches was surrounded by the points and the background fabric. And then the little 4 patch went in each corner, and then I just sewed those together. So that's row 4 complete, and it's very pretty, isn't it? I think what I'm going to do though is swap over the cotton reels with the hearts, because I've put a central blue fabric together. So I'll just swap those over. So in those fat quarter bundles there were 5 pieces, like I've said. 4 were pale backgrounds and 1 had this sort of minty green background, and it read quite differently from the other 4 when it was put together on the quilt. And so I just wanted to swap those greeny minty blues away from each other, so that's why I swapped those rows. Yes, I think those colours are working better now, and there is still sashing to put in. So when you are engaged in a sew along, you don't know what's coming next, and so you make your fabric selections to go with what's gone before, and you put things together. And sometimes, depending on the fabric you're using as well, there's sometimes constraints there. So in the fabric bundle I had, there was only sort of 1 contrasting colour, this minty green. The rest had a pale black background, and so because I'd chosen to put those cotton reels and that green in the centre, they sort of clumped together. They were too dominant in that part of the quilt, and so that's why I chose to move those around. As long as you haven't joined the whole thing together, you have got that flexibility with the design. Yes, I think I prefer that layout, separating the heart from the stars, those solid yellow blocks. So I can put a sashing now between the shoe fly row and the heart row and join those together. And then on Wednesday, Sheri will give us our last row, which is a smaller block, I believe, and then I'll be able to choose the colour combinations so that it all ties together nicely. So that's it now. Those pieces all joined together, the sashing's on. I'm just waiting for that last row, and then I'll put a border on, nice and bright. I'm calling this one Rhubarb and Custard. So I'm not sure really why I imagined the last block was a smaller block. Don't know, it was just lodged in my head from somewhere, and so I was quite surprised when it was these big blocks in the centre. It's called Woven Quilt, that block. Again, I have altered the design because I wanted to put some of that mint green into that row. I've used it in every other row, so I wanted it in that one, and so these little squares here I've used in mint green. In Sheri's design, those were the same colour as the individual blocks, and there was a gap with the background between the blocks, so I've sort of merged mine together to make them fit my rows. And so the woven quilt is very simple to put together, just rectangles and squares. So I started off with a larger rectangle in the centre with 2 squares on each side, and you can see how I built that up in squares, and it came together really quickly. There were only the 3 blocks, and in the central block I didn't need to put those little mint green squares. It was just the central 3 rows. But as I laid them on the wall, I decided next morning when I came in that I would just take out the centre column, and I would unpick that and put a little pink in the centre. I think it just drew your eye to the centre of the quilt, and I think it worked better in the end. So that's it all joined together. It's 38.5 inches wide and is 52 inches long. And so because it's 5 rows and 3 of them were bigger blocks, I decided to put the bigger blocks on the top, the middle and the bottom, and so the smaller blocks are near the centre. And I think that's turned out really pretty. I think someone somewhere will really enjoy that quilt. So I just used a plain white cotton to back it, and I quilted it stitch in the ditch, and that was it, finished. So that's my first experience of a sew along. It is an interesting experience. It's a bit of a mystery, like I said, because you don't know what's coming next, and you do need to be flexible. It is easier if you follow the dimensions of each block. I mean, I've had to scale mine down, but it wasn't a problem. It's worked out okay. And it's interesting that Sheri ran this one, but she often follows Pat Sloan's. Pat Sloan does a regular sew along, and she often follows hers. So yeah, I've enjoyed it. Thank you, Sheri McGill, and I might do another one day. And if you are still with me after all of that, thank you for your company, and enjoy your sewing. Have a go, see what you think, and let us know in the comments your experiences if you have engaged in a sew along before. And I will see you next week. Take really good care of yourselves. Bye.